Hello everyone, my name's Joe Meek.
On February 3, 1967, British recording iconoclast Joe Meek inexplicably murdered his landlady with a shotgun before turning the weapon on himself, ending a career that led from precocious beginnings to international fame and ultimately to oblivion. Along the way, Meek profoundly influenced the way records were made in England and around the world, an influence still being felt today. Meek routinely violated the rules of microphone selection and placement, intentionally overloaded microphone preamps and pushed record levels into the red, mercilessly squashed signals with compressors and limiters, and added excessive amounts of tape echo chamber, and spring reverb to his tracks and mixes. Meek also pioneered sound-on-sound recording in England beginning in the mid-1950s and flanging as early as 1957. Although commonplace now, nearly all these techniques were typically considered radical and wrong by the British recording industry at the time. Joe Meek's Bold Techniques, now in its second edition, chronicles the career of this fascinating figure, detailing his revolutionary approach to recording and the gear he employed to achieve his singular sounds. It includes 2 chapters focusing on Meek's often overlooked 50s period, when he was an in-demand engineer in London's top studios, tracking scores of hit records by major British artists. Many of those records became hits as a result of Meek's innovative touches, such as the pumped-up hi-hats and piano bass on Humphrey Littleton's Bad Penny Blues, and the punchy rhythm section and fat clarinet sound on Chris Barber's Petite Fleur. Meek also crafted catchy sound effects, such as an arrow hitting a target, a storm at sea, a thunderclap, and the sound of marching soldiers, the latter created by shaking a box of rocks. Joe Meek also wrote many songs, including a ditty called Put a Ring on My Finger, which American recording stars Les Paul and Mary Ford had a minor hit with in 1958. Les Paul had been one of Meek's heroes for many years, and there are striking parallels between the two. But Paul remained unaware of Meek until he was interviewed for Joe Meek's Bold Techniques.
I know nothing about Joe Meek. Yeah, I didn't even know he wrote a song called Ring on My Finger. None of it. That shows you how close someone can be and yet so far away.
And speaking of far away, in 1959, Joe Meek recorded what he called an outer space music fantasy about life on the moon. Chock-a-block with quirky tunes and spacey effects, I Hear a New World was produced in stereo, though just how remains a mystery, as Meek possessed no stereo gear.
I've tried, and I've had to do it rather carefully, to create the impression of space, of things moving in front of you, of a picture of parts of the moon.
An entire chapter is devoted to this extraordinary recording, and a link is provided to streaming tracks that present the album as Meek intended it to be heard, newly restored for the second edition of the book. In 1960, Meek set up shop for himself in a third-floor walk-up flat at 304 Holloway Road in London, where he produced a string of hits and hundreds of less successful records, most boasting his trademark track layering, tape echo, spring reverb, and over-the-top compression, with his earliest efforts also featuring sugary string arrangements, wacky special effects, and mawkish heavenly choir backing vocals. Meek's major hits included John Layton's ghostly death disc Johnny Remember Me and his masterpiece Telstar, performed by the Tornadoes, which topped the charts across Europe and the United States and beyond in 1962. Telstar also gets its own chapter. But Meek didn't just record sappy ballads, spooky death discs, and bouncy space-age pop in his home studio. Surfy guitar anthems, shock rock, strange takes on jazz and country, efforts by Buddy Holly, Eddie Cochran, and Elvis impersonators, and even psychedelia were just some of the other sounds that poured forth from 304 Holloway Road. When making these records, Meek employed top studio musicians, including Ritchie Blackmore, later of Deep Purple fame, who played on dozens of tracks. In his interview for the book, Blackmore described how Meek coaxed a particularly brilliant solo from him while recording the Outlaws' version of Shake With Me.
It came out well, because Joe just said, well, I want you to go crazy on this solo. Abandon. So I just kind of played as many notes as possible and that were vaguely relative.
Future Yes guitarist Steve Howe, too, shared tales of recording at 304 while still a teenager. The first track he recorded with his band, The Syndicats, was Chuck Berry's Maybelline.
But the great thing he did with me was that was the first record that made me put delay repeats on the guitar solo. You know, it made it sound pretty zany. I got real interested. You know, I suddenly thought, wow, this recording thing is anything's possible.
But Howe was considerably less inspired by Meek's fondness for his tight-fitting trousers.
And I couldn't really connect the two things. You know, that I was working with a producer who kept liking my trousers.
Not everyone Meek fancied was as diplomatic as Howe, including another future celebrity, as recalled by regular backup vocalist Ted Fletcher.
One day we arrived for a session there, and there was a terrible row going on up in the studio, and suddenly a bloke came flying down the stairs, having been ejected from the studio, and told never to darken my doors, never to come back again. And it was Tom Jones.
Led Zeppelin's Jimmy Page also played on numerous sessions at 304 Holloway Road and cites Meek as a major influence on his own production style. Joe Meek's last major hit was Have I the Right by the Honeycombs in 1964, and it is commonly held that he was a casualty of the British invasion, becoming increasingly out of touch as the 60s progressed. Meek also suffered from what was likely paranoid schizophrenia, routinely abused stimulants, and was continually stressed due to personal and professional problems. Nonetheless, Meek made some extraordinary recordings in 1965 and 1966, and by the time he pulled the trigger in early 1967, many of the once radical recording techniques he pioneered were being used daily in studios around the world. Joe Meek's Bold Techniques is available in a limited edition hardcover print version and as an ebook in all formats.